Bienvenue tout le monde à cet événement de l'Institut sur la science, la société et la politique publique. We are very pleased to welcome you here this afternoon for a tremendous panel that's entitled Pathways to Leadership and Entrepreneurship, a conversation with Indigenous and non-Indigenous women. We're going to begin with a land acknowledgement. So just a moment here while we put it on the screen so you can all see. This is the University of Ottawa's land acknowledgement. I encourage you to read it along with me. We pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future.
Wonderful. Thank you, Monica, for the land acknowledgement. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jace Meyer. I'm a Métis woman joining you from the Algonquin speaking territory, also known as Songhees territory on Vancouver Island. It's an honor to join all of these panelists on our virtual stage today as we talk about all of the different pathways to leadership and entrepreneurship. This topic's really meaningful to me, and I'll share with you just a brief story before we get started about this. Once I had an elder share with me that, like a feather, we all have a pathway and a journey to go along, but not all of our journeys are going to look the exact same. And in fact, that's what makes all of the differences between feathers so interesting. And I think you'll see between our panelists that there have been a plethora of feathers to choose from as we all emerge into our leadership and entrepreneurship journeys. As we meet our panelists today, each of them will share with us about 7 minutes of their lived experience and their expertise. If you have any questions as they're speaking, you can use our Q&A box just down on the bottom right hand of your screen to ask your question of the speaker. We'll hold our questions until the end so that we can hear from everybody, and there'll be plenty of time at the end for us to dig further into any of your questions. When you do ask your question, we ask that you share with us your first name and the name of the place in which you join us. You're welcome to share that with us by city name, or if you're interested, you could also share with us by traditional territory name as well. And I'll share with you in the chat a link in order for you to find exactly where it is that you're situated on whose land, the website that'll help you understand that. We are being recorded today. We are being streamed live right now on YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And the recording of this session will be available to everyone tomorrow on the ISSP landing page. So any resources or materials shared today will be available for you there tomorrow morning. And with that, we will not waste any time so that we can give as much time to our speakers as absolutely possible. So I'm pleased to welcome first to our virtual stage, Gail Gallagher, to really help us set the stage and the context about some of the experiences women and Indigenous women really are dealing with on their path to leadership and throughout their leadership journeys. So with that, Gail, I'll turn it over to you to help us set the context for this morning.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jace, for that awesome introduction. So my name, as Jay said, is my name is Gail Gallagher. I'm Cree First Nation from Alberta. I'm from Frog Lake First Nation. I would also like to acknowledge the unceded traditional Algonquin territory that we're on, that I'm speaking from, in the National Capital Region of Ottawa. And I'm honored to be here today and to speak on with this panel of such knowledgeable and esteemed female panel speakers. So today I'm going to be speaking on the marginalization of Indigenous women and girls. And I realize it's a pretty broad topic, so I'm going to try to focus it in a bit. So Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people are a very vulnerable group, population, and it comes from the roots of colonial violence. And we are disproportionately more likely to experience violence in our lifetime. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit of my story as well. And I will be also sharing some counseling resources at the end, because the topic I'm talking on is quite a sensitive and emotionally triggering topic. So my background, as I said, I'm Cree from Alberta, and I did participate in the Truth and Reconciliation sharing circles as a intergenerational survivor, and I also was featured in the Globe and Mail news story with Murray Sinclair, who's currently a senator right now. My mother was a day school scholar, and I've been blessed with many opportunities in my life, and I've also had many challenges. As many Indigenous women, we also grew up poor. I grew up on my father's farm. We had no running water. My father is actually German and Irish. Everyone, when I say my father is a trapper, everyone assumes he's the Indigenous side of my heritage, but actually my father was a hunter and trapper and farmer, and he was German and Irish, and my mother was Cree. So today I'm speaking on a topic which has been a long time passion of mine. I've been an advocate of missing and murdered Indigenous women and Idle No More for many years. And I just want to make it clear, I don't speak for the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I mean, I don't speak for the families of MMIW. That is their story to share. And as I said, it can be a difficult topic to speak on and can be also very triggering. So my thesis that I wrote was based on how art can be used as a form of activism and how it can be used as a method to increase awareness of this issue. There are many methods and types of activism, and there's many types of art forms. My thesis title was Walking with Our Sisters, the Red Dress Project as Activism and Raising Awareness of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. So the focus of my research, I forgot to tell you, I graduated March 2020. So last year I graduated right in the middle of a lockdown. So it was very difficult. I was kind of forced to travel across country. I didn't really want to, but I was told I needed to be there in person to defend my thesis, which I was very happy to do. So the focus of my research was on two bodies of work and how they can be used as a form of activism. So the two examples I focus on were Walking with Our Sisters, the Mox and Vamps exhibition, and the Red Dress Project. So both of these art exhibits drew attention to gendered and racialized nature of violent crimes against Indigenous women that's happening in Canada. And so a lot of people may not have attended the Walking with Our Sisters. So somebody asked me once, like, what are Mox and Vamps? So if you don't know, they're the top of Mox and Vamps. So I'm actually wearing my moccasins now. So this would be the part of the Mox and Vamp, which was on display, and they were used to represent, at the time, 1,200 missing and murdered Indigenous women. So this work was intended to enlighten and broaden the collective thinking of Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. And it highlighted the solidarity in addressing racialized violence facing Indigenous women and girls. So I actually traveled and I attended the Walking with Our Sisters final exhibition at Batoche, Saskatchewan. And that was in August of 2019. So I was able to attend that, and I actually volunteered as a volunteer to work along with the other volunteers at the exhibit out in Saskatchewan, at Batoche, Saskatchewan. And it was a very powerful, moving ceremony. Every morning we smudged, and I actually worked at the front gate, letting people in as they started their path down to the river to observe the Mox and Vamps. So it was a very powerful and moving experience for me. And one of the most moving experiences for me was at the very end, after these 2 days of the Mox and Vamps displayed. I was able to interview Christy Belcourt. She was very gracious with her time and very generous, and allowed me to interview her. And it was a very moving experience because as a Métis woman, she was able to share like her motivation for why she did the walking with her sisters, Mox and Vamp art exhibit. And she really spoke of her love for Indigenous children and, her wish for ending gender-based violence in our communities. And that really touched me as an Indigenous woman as well. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. Indigenous women and girls are one of the most marginalized populations in Canada, and we face many barriers. We also possess a lot of intergenerational trauma, but also we possess intergenerational resilience. So our strengths as Indigenous people is our connection to our language, our land, and our culture. However, at the same time, we've also lost a lot of connection to our land and our culture and our language. And in our history, Indigenous people have had a long history of being dislocated, spanning over 500 years since the arrival of the first European settlers. And I'm actually a descendant of the Papachaise First Nation band that was originally settled in Edmonton, Alberta, in southeastern Edmonton, which exists now. But back in the 1800s, late 1800s, it was actually reserved. But my ancestors were dislocated from that land by early Edmonton politicians, Oliver, and also from the early settlers. So due to influences of European colonization, Indigenous women's roles were significantly diminished in contemporary society today. So due to negative influences of colonialism, the voices of Indigenous women has been largely absent from various types of Indigenous governance development and discussions. So Indigenous women's voices have faced a long history of being silenced by colonialism, even from first European contact. And from its earliest beginnings, colonialism has implemented a patriarchal system in Canadian society that has negatively impacted Indigenous women. And some of the early influences of European contact and influence on early Indigenous societies and our governance structures, it still affects Indigenous women today. And prior to the arrival of Europeans, traditional roles of Indigenous women in our society were quite different, and many Indigenous societies were matrilineal. And I just want to talk a little bit about statistics. So I'm not timing myself, so I hope Jace is going to cue me when there's my last 2 minutes are coming up. So
we have about 1 minute here, Gail.
Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to quickly talk about some stats. So Indigenous women are more likely to be killed by acquaintances than non-Indigenous women, and 7 times as likely to be targeted by serial killers. And Indigenous women are 6 times more likely to be a victim of homicide than non-Indigenous women. And Indigenous women are sexually assaulted 3 times more often than non-Indigenous women. And many of women and children in Canada are trafficked are Indigenous. And there continues to be widespread denial of rights and dehumanization of Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. So we must acknowledge that the crisis of Indigenous women and girls has been centuries in the making, and it runs deeply through the foundational fabric of our country and society. So I just want to close by sharing my friend Gregory Schofield. He does a lot of spoken poetry, which I also do. So I just wanted to share this as it is a form of using art to raise awareness of ending violence against Indigenous women. So I'm just going to share that, and hopefully it works because I'm not too tech savvy, as people know me. So I'll be sharing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you for listening. And you hear my dog snoring in the background. Sorry about that. All right.
She is spitting a mouthful of stars. She is laughing more than the men who beat her. She is 10 horses breaking open the day. She is new to her bones. She is holy in the dust. She is spitting a mouthful of stars. She is singing louder than the men who raped her. She is walking beyond the Milky Way. She is new to her breath. She is sacred in this breathing. She is spitting a mouthful of stars. She is holding the light more than those who despised her. She is folding clouds in her movement. She is new to the sound. She is unbroken flesh. She is spitting a mouthful of stars. She is laughing more than those who shamed her. She is 10 horses breaking open the day. She is new to these bones. She is holy in their dust.
Gail, thank you for sharing that with us. Setting the context of the barriers against Indigenous women is not an easy topic to cover in 7 minutes, with the legacy of residential schools and 60 Scoop and over-policing and just a history of genocide, really. So thank you for the brave work of having to do that first thing in the day for us. But we acknowledge that because we need to acknowledge truth before we can get to reconciliation, which is really what Denise Ann Boissonneau is going to unpack for us in her contributions here this morning. So Denise, I welcome you to the stage to share with us some of your insights, especially as someone who's worked in the legal system, about how this is showing up, historically and currently for Indigenous women and girls.
Miigwech, thank you very much. Welcome everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers coordinator, Sandra, for bringing us all together, and her team, as well as the ISSP and ISN and all the wonderful colleagues that were here together. Ani bonjour. Good day, everyone. I acknowledge my presence on Anishinaabe land called Canada. Gratitude to the Algonquin peoples for their generosity and medicines. I would like to have a special thank you to Gail for your informative presentation and your profound sentiments. I would like to pursue the conversation by addressing the topic of Indigenous women and human rights. I came across an interesting facts in the last couple of days. Today is the 102nd year that women have been calling for equal rights. You've heard me right. The first Women's Day for promoting rights was back in 1919. Another interesting fact, of the 195 independent sovereign nations, only 10 countries have women's equal advancement through their policy framework. Canada's positioned 8 on that short list. Then it's Ireland. Our neighbors to the south, United States of America, hasn't made that list yet. That said, despite its policy framework, women are not treated equal in Canada. But within our Indigenous population, women face additional burdens, inequality as experienced with the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls, and the overrepresentation of Indigenous women in federal corrections. Now, before moving forward, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a graduate of this university's common law faculty. I have practiced law, I have worked as a law policy advisor, and today I consult on justice and human rights. My ancestor root is Manitoulin Island, located in the Great Lakes waterway system that connects to Wikwemicombe, my father's community, and Mckenzie is my mother's community. I'm a proud mom and a grandmother, Nokomis, of 2. Today, I will speak on Indigenous women rights in 3 lenses: Indigenous legal traditions, culture medicine wheel teachings, and women Indigenous leadership. First, when discussing Indigenous women's rights, most often we must start with the need to address and recognize the past wrongs before taking a step forward. But let's first start with sharing a positive story. that happened in this university in the Faculty of Law. The cohort of 2018 is the first student body graduating with their law degree. This spring, to have exposed to Indigenous realities when subject to the criminal justice system in Canada. They were made to experience 3 sets of activities: exploring social realities of the impacts of colonization through the Kairos blanket exercise, experience how marginalized populations are unduly treated by the justice system, learn cultural awareness and techniques to best serve Indigenous offenders. This series of activities has advanced the sensitivity of these students that will soon hang their shingle on Main Street and helps them in providing services to Indigenous peoples. However, more must be done in addition to learning about Indigenous ways of being and legal rights, cultures, languages, and traditions. The future cohorts must also learn about Indigenous laws as well as business law. Young lawyers must have a working knowledge on Indigenous governance and building relationships. As well, new opportunities will open up to those lawyers looking to represent Indigenous peoples on legal matters. In my lifetime, as a practitioner of Canadian Aboriginal law, my objectives have been to generate cultural awareness and social norms of Indigenous communities. Criminal law informed to enable the sentencing principles to Indigenous social. Could anyone online explain to me how is the federal incarcerated system, the Indigenous population is 4% of female inmates are Indigenous women, 30% are male, while we have Indigenous peoples represent 5% of Canada's population. Let me tell you a few things I have observed as a practitioner of law in Canada. There are no Indigenous specific statutory provisions recognizing Indigenous women and their cultural appropriate services and needs within correctional system. Similarly, the Indigenous Peoples Court do not reflect the needs of Indigenous women. Thirdly, lack of support and resources for women's healing and safe offender reintegration for community well-being. Actors of the criminal justice system fail to realize Indigenous concepts are based on the Aboriginal constitutional rights. When it comes to family law and child welfare protection, the justice system lacks the understanding of kinship, customs, community norms, and standards. In my opinion, the missing link to solving the stated issues include a greater cultural awareness within the correctional environment and the justice system, the adoption of specific provisions recognizing the needs of federally sentenced Indigenous women. Elders must be given greater role as custodians of Indigenous knowledge and ceremonies. The justice system must enable the healing of Indigenous women offenders that facilitates her reintegration in her community, Indigenous community. There is a need for increased collaboration between the systems, I quote, and Indigenous communities to enhance the healing capacities of women lodges and restorative justice. Now, the second heading is cultural medicine wheels and its teachings. The medicine wheel is a holistic Indigenous theory. It symbolizes dimensions of health and the life cycles of life. It is relational practice to sustain balance and harmony of the individual and the collective. The circle is split into 4 segments. They are commonly known as the 4 dimensions, 4 cardinal points, which intersects human well-being. There is the physical body, emotions, the mind, and spirituality, while finding wholeness through respect and trust. These 4 segments also embody the 4 directions, known as Father Sky, Mother Earth, Grandfather Sun, the water, the air, the trees, that connects us to our ancestors. As a whole, the medicine wheel, it is an expression of cultural knowledge, and it guides both internal and external social changes. It governs processes through the Indigenous knowledge system as the way of being. The foundational to the medicine wheel is a culture of respect. Medidimowin is Anishinaabe principles. Now, the last heading is Women, Indigenous Leadership. Despite the fact that Canada is one of the 10 countries from a group of 193 sovereign nations that has entrenched women as equal in its laws, I will not be revealing a secret if I tell you that's nice. But the real question is, when will women be treated equal? In the workplace, in accessing positions of leadership, and in the earning of equal pay for an equal job. It's also no secret if I tell you, given bias, lower education attainment, poverty, isolation, and so on equality for Indigenous women requires for them to climb a number of additional steps on the proverbial ladder so they may reach their non-Indigenous sisters on an equal footing. Let's now talk about Indigenous women and their approach to leadership.
Denise,
Traditional.
I'm actually going to ask to interrupt you there so that we can actually hear from Sophia before she's going to have to unfortunately leave us today. But I'm mindful of the fact that we might have time to come back to this towards the end. But your question about how do we create equality for Indigenous women so that they can reach the same rungs of the proverbial ladder, I think is exactly what Sophia is going to offer us today as she talks about really the requirement for women to open those doors. So Sophia, Leong, welcome to the stage. Please share with us while we still have you on our panel today.
Rich.
Just want to make sure that everyone could hear me. All good? Thank you so very much. And I really sincerely wish that I could stay for the entirety of this particular event. It's always so incredible and also necessary to listen and also to hear and to understand, to really appreciate and understand what are the hurt and the trauma that are facing what I call our brothers and sisters on earth. I do have a little bit of time, and then after that, I'm going to jump off. But what I would do also is I'm not going to go through, I prepared a top 10 list in terms of guiding my breathing, living, and being. I'm just going to pick a few. And I believe Sandra and Jay, you could provide a takeaway to our participants. Really interesting and heartwarming, but also a reality check, hearing from Gail and also Denise. And I think one of the things that I'm always looking at is from a perspective of, can we focus and can we look inward, but also at the same time leverage strength in our community to find our true north, to find our leadership moments, and also to develop a habit or muscle to kick down doors, because a lot of doors are closed on purpose. We know that. Sometimes they sort of open it up and give you a little bit of light. And I hope that I would encourage our brothers and sisters to really look at this and take the opportunity to kick down the doors respectfully. What I would do in the next few minutes really is to provide you a few rules, or what I call, life rules from my top 10 rules. And hopefully you have a sense of the essence of my being, and also at the same time too, why it's important for all of us to work together, understand each other's pain, find pathway where we could actually lift everyone up, but more importantly, to provide each other with incredible support and understanding. And it's not just passive understanding, active understanding, and always understand where the individuals are coming from, their perspective. Talking about trauma, I have a very privileged background, but I also went through a lot in a very short period of time. I'm Malaysian Chinese. I was born in Malaysia, the land of the tropics, but I love to ski and I love the cold weather. But I lost my mom and my dad and my sister tragically and also my brother very, very early on. So we are technically, my brother and I are technically orphaned. So we rely on each other heavily, but we're also rely on a lot of mentors and individuals and elders in our community that has taken the time to love us and to really shepherd us along. I'm going to share with you some of the life lessons that I've learned, and I think it applies to not just in terms of self, but more importantly also for entrepreneurship, because I think in life we need to create value, not to extract it. With that in mind, the first one, every single morning when I wake up, it's always about being kind and generous and forgiving to self, because I think if you can't forgive yourself, you cannot love yourself. I think that's a fundamentally life rule. The other piece also is really understanding and be realistic, and not live in the Pollyanna world of everything is easy, because I think social media make it sound as if everything is easy. Someone make $1 billion in 5 days, you know? No. Everything is not difficult, but it's also not easy. If I could coin the words of Mother Teresa, she used to say, things are not difficult, it's just different. I think it's about shifting the mind space and shifting the perspective of realizing every single thing that you touch on, be prepared that is not gonna be easy, okay? But also at the same time too, when you fall down, just get up. We always, in my home, we always have a saying, if you fall down, there's no blood on the floor, get up and keep moving. One of the things I think experiencing death in the family and tragedies early on in my life, I realized that time is so limited. So the key thing is don't waste time. Don't wait for opportunities, go and get it. It goes back to kicking down the doors. If there's a door or a pathway that you really want to go towards, if it's not open, knock at it gently. If it's not open, again, kick it down respectfully. But if there's a crack, kick it open. I think that sense of urgency is really, really important. 2 more things I'm going to share before I unfortunately have to go is the power of your network. And it's not just network, it's the diversity in the network. A diversity of network that offers you friendships, mentorship, just ears in terms of listening, perspective, voices. All of us hear voices in our quiet moment. Let's just choose the type of voices we want to listen to. Jay and I talked about yesterday about trusting inconvenient truth. Listen inconvenient truth to people that deserve your trust, not just anyone, right? Inconvenient truth is really important for all of us to grow, but it has to come from an honest and intentional source. And it has to come from a source that really cares for us. And that's really, really critical. Diversity is so key because of the fact that it offers us different perspective and richness and connectivity. Confidence is really important. Confidence is a muscle that grows. It grows with risks that we take. It grows with grits and it grows with courage. Confidence grows because individuals are willing to ask for help. Leadership is about asking for help. It's not about just going on your own merry way and thinking that you can do it all. You can't. You have to ask for help. Now, let me leave this, the last one. Be your own best friend. Everyone said, you have to have good friends. Yeah, yourself. If you have one best friend, make it you. If you're super lucky, you have another best friend. Sandra and I are sisters. I love her dearly, and I'm lucky to have her, right? So to me, it's a jackpot already because I have one other person that loves me for who I am, right? So that's really important. I want to leave that with you, and I apologize. I have to jump off to another event, but boy, very, very necessary conversation. Important to hear narratives and stories. important to reflect in terms of pain points, trauma, but also opportunities, and also creating pathways for each other. And I think all of us could really look at this and say, what can we do collectively to lift up the whole community? Man, it's not easy, but it's not difficult. If we can do it one at a time with no judgment. And I'm really speaking from self-perspective. I mean, there's still a lot of work that could be done from a public leadership perspective. That's a totally different discussion. So what I'm suggesting is leadership moments to really guide your breathing, your living and being. So I want to thank you so hard, so sincerely to having me here and providing a safe space for me to provide and share my perspective. And I believe Jay and Sandra, there's an opportunity to provide the PDF to our participants. And with that in mind, I wish you a fantastic rest of the event. I really want to stay. And Sandra and I will click again and share with me in terms of how it went the rest of the event. And with that in mind, I love you all. Terima kasih. That's Bahasa Malaysia from my home country. And I sincerely hope that everyone start being kind and generous and forgiving of themselves. And with that in mind, I'm going to bow out. Thank you so very much, Sandra, Jay, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you joining us. It's no surprise that women in leadership are busy. So I thank you for making the time to join us this morning. And to all of our panelists, actually, for just being so nimble as we accommodate all of our busy schedules. We're actually going to turn it back to Denise Ann for a moment, because I think there's a lot of wisdom she wasn't able to share with that last slide of hers. While she comes on screen and connects with us again, I remind the audience that they can be asking questions in our Q&A. We ask that you share your first name and your location with us, and I'll be collecting these questions as the panelists are speaking so that we can dive into them through a comprehensive Q&A at the end. So Denise Ann, if you'd like to join us again on screen, I'd really love to hear that last slide of yours.
You guys continue on our leadership pathway. I'm jealous, Sandra. How come I don't get a phone call? I'm on the next meet. But anyways, on a serious note, the pathway of leadership and dealing of women's leadership, and it was a nice segue to hear from Sophia to bring us to that heart center. That heart center is our medicine wheel. It's our medicine within. To be able to hold that space as I move forward now. Zoginduin is that love. It's another Anishinaabe principle, that love, that Zoginduin. As we carry on, I will wrap up with our women leadership. Traditionally, Indigenous women are viewed as autonomous, with key roles as life givers and caretakers within our creation stories. Women frequently had functions within spiritual ceremonies and within Indigenous governments. In July 2015, the TD Bank report noted that Indigenous women were leading the way in Canada's labor market, outperforming both Indigenous men and non-Indigenous populations. What can we do to improve our position on the ladder? We can speak out against stereotypes. Example, white fragility, white supremacy. We need to learn lessons from the past if we are to avoid similar errors in the future. We need to work together in respect of our cultural differences to inspire each other. We need to exercise patience and take time to reflect on important issues before pronouncing ourselves. We need to seek balance in our lives. We need to build relationships, be diplomatic, be transparent, and foremost, we need to be good, active listeners and hear the voice of others. Now, in closing, women have been fighting since 1919 to obtain equal rights. There has been improvement since, but still much has to be done. However, I thank you There is hope in a recent 2020 millennial survey by Deloitte. Young people are not going back to the pre-demic normal. They remain steadfast, refusing to compromise their values, and that attitude may ultimately help change society. Miigwech, Bamapi, all our relations.
Wonderful, wonderful. We couldn't finish this panel without hearing you complete all of those thoughts, Denise. And so appreciate you staying nimble as we allow Sophia to join us and leave us. So thank you, Miigwech, for that. Next, we're going to continue to evolve the conversation. It's really easy to get stuck in the barriers and the stereotypes and some of the struggles that Indigenous women are facing on their path to leadership, to entrepreneurship. But the truth is that the story is so much more interesting than that. And here to enlighten us and give us some really beautiful stories and examples of that is Chantal Fraser. Chantal, thank you.
Thank you, Jace. I appreciate being here. First, I'd like to acknowledge and say that I'm grateful to be giving this talk to you from the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, otherwise known as Quinte West, Ontario. I'm also grateful for the privilege that I enjoy having grown up in a military family and having served for 28 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. I also acknowledge the privileges that society grants me as a white-coated, cisgender, heterosexual woman. In the past 8 years since I became a veteran, I've learned that the speaking, training, and coaching that I most enjoyed doing while I was in the military can help other people learn how to thrive in their businesses or careers. Since 2014, I've been working with strategic partner Indigenous Link, and what I do with them is I'm their outsourced training department to teach mostly mainstream employers how to find, attract, hire, and retain Indigenous employees. Another thing that I do is I act as a thought partner, or what you might think of as a coach, to help people who are going through career transitions or starting and growing a business. Now, Jace mentioned that we live in a world where there's lots of barriers and there's lots of negative stereotypes, and occasionally the mainstream media seems to focus on negative stories. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about 3 Indigenous women who are successful entrepreneurs to illustrate the truth that Indigenous women are successful entrepreneurs, in spite of the barriers and challenges we faced. I'm also going to give a very brief introduction into 3 organizations that are helping Indigenous women thrive with their own businesses. So what do you think of when you think of an Indigenous woman entrepreneur? Imagine, if you will, a success story. Did you imagine that a gifted fashion or jewelry designer, an artist, a writer, those are all great stories. Many Indigenous women are running businesses based or inspired on the traditional teachings of their communities through traditional clothing, foods, medicines, art. There's all kinds of different ways to grow a business. The 3 women that I'm going to talk about next have chosen a different path. First, I'd like to tell you about Vikki Oftemar. She's Inuk. She grew up in Iqaluit, Nunavut, and she spent 13 years learning about entrepreneurship in the restaurant industry. She started as a restaurant hostess, worked her way through different roles in the restaurant up to becoming a 5-star event manager for A-list celebrities, and then started a successful restaurant company called Porchetta & Company, co-founding that now has 4 locations in the downtown Toronto area. But that wasn't Vikki's dream. Her dream was helping other Indigenous women learn how to decolonize money. So what she's done now is she has a business as an intuitive coach that helps people with their life, their business, their money mindset, to help people unpack some of those barriers and structures that have been forced down on Indigenous peoples so that they can learn how to thrive in their businesses and lives. Lisa Isaac is a certified human resources leader, amongst a bunch of other certifications, and she started her career holding human resources and leadership roles in the manufacturing, energy, and banking industries in Alberta, Nunavut, Ontario, and in her home community of Moose Deer Point First Nation. Lisa's also a U of Ottawa and University of Lethbridge alumni, so she's got a couple of degrees under her belt. In 2018, Lisa started her boutique HR firm, Lisa Isaac HR Professional Services, in Sarnia, Ontario. Her business is recognized as Aboriginal owned by the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Businesses. Lisa and her team of 3 staff help Indigenous communities and organizations from coast to coast to coast across the lands we call Canada with their HR requirements. In addition, Lisa and her team help non-Indigenous community organizations and businesses in Northern Ontario. Karen Mckenzie is Cree and Métis. In 2003, she co-funded an international consulting company called Macintosh Canada, which is also recognized by CCAB as being Aboriginal owned. Macintosh Canada offers community development, capacity building, workplace readiness, and consulting services. Karen's got an MBA from the University of Dalhousie and a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from St. Mary's University. Vikki, Lisa, and Karen are but a few examples of Indigenous women thriving as entrepreneurs based on their lived experiences and professional lives and training. Now I'm going to shift the focus to touch very, very briefly on 3 of the dozens of programs that exist to help Indigenous women thrive as entrepreneurs. In 2020, the Native Women's Association of Canada launched the Be the Drum Entrepreneur Navigation Program. And what this program does is offer a variety of services to Indigenous women from across the lands we call Canada to help us grow our existing businesses or even launch a business. It includes one-on-one coaching with entrepreneur navigators who are 6 women with different experiences and backgrounds from across the lands we call Canada, weekly check-ins as a group, weekly check-ins for bookkeeping, online learning, conferences, and my favorite part, I'm a member and a presenter for this program. My favorite part about the program is that we all learn from where we're at, from the perspectives we have in our respective business experiences. So we learn from subject matter experts, we learn from the navigators, and we learn from each other as we support each other growing our businesses. FedDev Ontario funded the Queen's University Women Entrepreneur Can project. And this project has more than 20 programs. The one I want to focus in on today was created in partnership, with Shira Barberstock, and it's the Quaid Biz Supporting Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurs. This program is specifically for Indigenous women entrepreneurs in Southeastern Ontario and provides, provides mentoring, it provides business program and business accelerator cohorts so that women can thrive together. I'd just like to give a shout out to Shira Barberstock, another successful Indigenous woman entrepreneur, who's also the co-founder of uOttawa Equal Source, which is an international consulting company and is headquartered in Canada in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory, just down the road from me. Last but not least, the Perro Center in Thunder Bay offers services to help Indigenous women in Northern Ontario, remote and rural communities learn how to grow their business, from starting in a business idea through helping with procurement to helping people launch and do all kinds of things. One thing, and the most critical reason why I wanted to show you this presentation is Perro also has Inuktitut content on their website, which I think is fabulous. So in closing, I probably took more than 7 minutes. It was just long enough to give you a taste of all the different programs that are out there helping Indigenous women thrive, and to give you a sampling of Indigenous women who are successful entrepreneurs, all of us in different stages of our journey. Just as Canada has dozens of universities across our lands, there's dozens of programs to help Indigenous women. But there's more than one way to learn, so there's probably room for even one more. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. We could have given you all 90 minutes to talk about the successes of Indigenous women entrepreneurs, because there are so many stories to share with our audience today. But I appreciate the actionable links that you've shared with our audience, especially if there's Indigenous women viewing our presentation today. And next, I want to talk about what it takes to co-create the conditions for Indigenous women entrepreneurs to thrive by inviting Sandra Schill to the stage this morning to talk about her work in collaborating on a national Indigenous women's entrepreneurship ecosystem. So Sandra, please join us.
Thank you so much, Jace. Thank you, speakers who went before me. As was pointed out, I'm with the Institute for Science, Society and Policy. I'm also a professor at the Telfer School of Management. And at the Institute for Science, Society and Policy, I lead the Inclusive Innovation Research Cluster. And I just want to say a couple of words on bringing this panel together. As I'm seeing, we're running up to the time here, and we've got some questions in the Q&A that I think I'd really like to get to. So first of all, thank you everybody for your contributions. Thank you, Gail, for your strength in honoring reality and the starting point or one of the points along the way where we're coming from. Thank you, Denise, for always generously sharing your knowledge and bringing us back to a place on the wheel and putting this work in context. Sophia has left us right now, but in addition to the hard space that she's shared with us, she's also a fabulous mover and shaker. And she's, for example, running a group that promotes leadership in women, targeted female students at this point. It's called the Heroes program. Heroes, like her program. Anyways, sorry for butchering that name, but what this is it actually allows us to support women in developing their leadership skills through events and training and exchange and accessing mentors. So that addresses a little bit one question in the chat here already, I hope. And Chantal, thank you very much for bringing the excitement about entrepreneurship into the space here, as entrepreneurship is one of the ways into leadership. What I'd like to do just in the next 4 or 5 minutes here, share a few of my experiences working with Guy Dancause from the IdeaConnector.net, who's also with us here today. And I'd just like to offer a few reflections on some work we've been doing to work towards this National Indigenous Women Entrepreneurs ecosystem. Just for very brief context here, what we're proposing to do is basically develop a program that is based on two-eyed seeing. So that comes in from our perhaps academic or our academic entrepreneurship education kind of perspective. So I do teach entrepreneurship at the Telfer School of Management, and a number of my entrepreneurship colleagues are quite keen to contribute and collaborate as well. But really targeting, developing a program that is open to, accessible, useful to, and that honors Indigenous women who might actually be interested in accessing this program. So it's not that I can go and develop a program and just take whatever I do in my classrooms and just bring it to the group of Indigenous women, but the intent here is to create an entrepreneurship program. So just a couple of key features to make sure that the co-creation, to give you the context here. So we are talking about an entrepreneurship program at the core. And we're also talking about making sure that Indigenous learners are supported, just like Chantal mentioned. The exchange, the access to mentoring, the access to communities, that is all super important. And what we're proposing is to not just provide that, prof at the front of the classroom that universities do really well, but actually really engage with the participants, co-create content that's relevant to them. And at the same time, then for us to learn how to do it. By the way, I did mean to mention, I forgot that I am a settler. So I immigrated to Canada from Germany. Germany came up a few times here today. And I'm very grateful to be on Algonquin territory. And I do much appreciate being able to live here. So what I need to do is, as we go through, is I need to learn. I need to acquire that worldview that is native to this space. And this is what we're kind of proposing to do in this place, so that we can come together and co-create this program. And so that I can get a handle on some of what Denise, for example, has been generously sharing with me and others, so that we can get to a place where we can have something that's very impactful for the Indigenous women that will be part of the ecosystem, and then also kind of encourages learning that goes both ways. I just wanted to share a few reflections, because there's a question in the Q&A here. And the question is, as women, and white women, who are still in the process of struggling for our own space in traditionally male-dominated fields, what can we do to ensure our victories, successes, and the sharing of our stories are opening doors and uplifting the voices of Indigenous women, not supplanting them? So this question came from Julia in Ottawa. And if I may, let me just share you a couple of things that I've been doing. I'm not Indigenous, so I can't share that perspective. What I can share, I believe, is my experience. So number one, I think the really important insight is that I need to listen as much as I speak, so that it can be about co-creation. The other thing I'm learning very quickly, the ISSP has generously given us the platform to do a few workshops now. We had a workshop on inclusive innovation just about a year ago, as Denise reminded me this morning. We had a workshop on Indigenous innovation. And what I'm finding as we're organizing these things, the conversation that I want to have, the conversation that I, as a Telfer prof who knows something about innovation, entrepreneurship, I feel I should be having, because that's where I have credibility. That's not always the conversation that actually needs to be had, and that actually is adding value. So being open to having actually really a two-way conversation, being open to listening to someone, even if they're speaking about what sounds to me is like not really super on topic, but actually really add to what I need to know in order to do this respectfully and to learn more, and then also maybe to share my knowledge differently. That is super important. One other point is that in engaging in this in these efforts to co-create, I think it's important that I do my own homework, and that I try to learn the best I can without going directly to my collaborators and asking them. So just to give you an example, I see this in my male colleagues who come to me and keep talking to me about how women are not disadvantaged anymore. And I have one colleague in particular who's taken up hours of my time, and I do appreciate the interest and the conversation. But what's happening is, if that person comes to me all the time to spend hours of my time discussing the topic that, honestly, number one, there's still discrimination going on, but number two, I'm not really, that's not something I'm here to discuss. What actually would be much more interesting for me would be if this colleague would actually maybe share some institutional knowledge, organizational knowledge, and actually open doors for me that way, so that I can actually be more effective in the organization. So if you get my drift here, what I'm saying is, I don't think I should go to anybody who's Indigenous who just happens to be in my organization and just take hours of their time trying to learn. What I think I need to do is I need to go to the people who are offering these resources. I need to do some internet reading. I need to, engage with people who are actually being paid to do that, perhaps, and make sure that when I work with colleagues in my organization, that I'm generous in sharing my organizational knowledge and facilitating access to resources that I know exist and that I can access. So that's kind of my personal take on that. And then last point, sorry, it was more than a couple of minutes here, last point, it's an interesting path, and a lot of our institutions, organizations are not aligned for this yet, and I think there's a lot of work left to be done for us to get this working well, and but I'm really hopeful, and I think we will actually create some pretty exciting pathways together for all of us so that we can all do better. And I'd like to just thank the ISSP again for hosting this event. I would like to thank Guy Dancause for bringing us all together. I'd like to thank Jace and our speakers for their fabulous contributions, and also everybody who's out there listening and who's asking questions and contributing that way. Thank you very much, Miigwech.
Thank you, Sandra. I think what you shared there about listening before speaking and the focus on co-creation, that's not a word that everyone is familiar with. We hear a lot about collaboration and working together, but the difference really, I think, with co-creation, it's not just about, will you sign off that you agree on this? Can you make sure that this is okay to do? But it's really about building it together so that that consensus is happening as the collaboration emerges, so that what is created is something new that's bringing two worldviews together. So that two-eyed seeing you started us with. And that was a great opportunity for us to start to jump into some of the Q&A that's come through as our speakers were sharing their lived experiences with us today. I invite the audience to move over to the Q&A now for further questions. Again, we ask that you share your first name and your location with us. I'd like to turn it to Danielle from Gatineau's question and ask Gail to speak to this. Gail, the question from Danielle is, what character traits should we be nurturing in our young girls in order for them to become leaders and mentors and entrepreneurs like yourselves, and really to create the change within their own lives?
Thanks, Jace. Can everyone hear me okay? And thank you, Danielle from Gatineau, for putting forth that question. She might want to hear from other people as well, as I would like to as well, but I have to log off soon for another meeting. But I just quickly want to respond. I did actually work for Equal Voice, and that was a program that is in Ottawa that encourages young women, both non-Indigenous and Indigenous, to get into the political sphere. So as well, some of the traits, that we could encourage, but I think it's really good to have, be a role model, and also to mentor, young Indigenous women and girls, and other, non-Indigenous young women and girls, and gender diverse. And I think it's really important to encourage, a positive attitude. That's really good to encourage, and also encourage your interest in a certain field as well. And actually, Jace and I had a conversation about this last night. We were talking about always be professional. That was one thing that, in every sphere, in any interaction that you have, always be professional in your personal life and in your professional life. But I have to log off now. So thank you, everyone, and have a good meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Gail. To further on our conversation last night, we had a really interesting conversation about kind of the dual roles and expectations that Indigenous women hold of being a role model to others and having to walk in two worlds and maintaining our teachings. And one of the expectations of Indigenous women is to be humble. So actually to be on a panel like this and share our accomplishments is sometimes a stretch, and can make us uncomfortable. And yet we know the balance of the need to also be a role model, and to kind of demonstrate what opportunities do look like in action. Denise Ann, I'd love to hear from you on this. Can you giggle? Please unmute yourself and share with us, like, how do you balance that traditional, some of the traditional teachings with, what we also know it takes to kind of thrive in these non-Indigenous spaces?
You guys for sharing. I just wanted to, I now forgive Sandra for acknowledging of why and what and where and how. I learned a new concept, co-creation. And also to build on the conversation from last night, Jace. And thank you for the prompt in. It's the balance. I like to build on what Sophia had said. So that interjection is the medicine wheel, is the circle. And so the ability to, it's a way of life. We heard about the different hats, the different places. The takeaway is one within yourself, acknowledging who you are. Acknowledging who you are. Who is your mom and dad? Because that's where the conflict comes in, is mom and dad. We like to blame mom and dad. And so being able to bring that together is that every individual has a mom and dad. We all came into this path. And so now I continue to struggle. But that struggle is being open. Because we live, especially the pandemic time has been a beautiful time for me. Because it's allowed me, give yourself permission to move forward, to be within yourself. We have all this influence around us. And going to the question of what Danielle, be who you are. Your mom and dad have taught you. Where are you in your life journey? Are you still carrying childhood? Are you still being frivolous and adventurous as in your teen years? Because through the cultural lens, our babies are babies until they're 30. And that's where we learn and help them as a community. That's where aunties and uncles come in. And I'll share a personal moment. I had lost my family at a young age. And that's what has restored my balance, is I had the strength of my aunties and uncles. So here in the capital, community is about family. That's our kinship. So the balance within yourself, it starts with your heart. And in our society, the soft language, the hard words is normal. The challenge to speak to the justice system, the legal system, is my mind and the ability to be able to think from my mind, but I also been tasked with a responsibility through community. So in closing, the balance of teachings is what you hold within your heart. Begins with the mom and dad, what you've learned in school. And sometimes people at 50, 60 years old are still in their minds. And that's the ability to listen. Because I was at that place with Sandra. I would talk a mile a minute. I would talk at you. And just preparing for today, I wanted to change the scenery. But I said, just let it be. And it was beautiful to hear Gail. And what to hear and how to listen. It's to be. And in closing, a circle. It's simple. When you leave and to the takeaway for the participants, when spring comes, pick up a rock as a reminder that you are centered in your own creation story. And we'll look forward to co-creating. Miigwech.
Thank you, Denise. And I think that's a really important message, right? That it is within us, that there's an enoughness for Indigenous women already. That's so easy to forget. Chantal, I'm curious if that shows up in your work with Empowered Paths. Is there particular themes or patterns you see? There's a lot of questions coming in about how to be a good ally and how to be of support to Indigenous women. Are you seeing there's certain areas that if someone could be of extra help that they could maybe double down on?
That's a great question. I just want to speak briefly on the first question, and then it'll roll into the because it sets up the conditions for the answer to the question you just asked me, because everything's circular, right, Denise? So everybody has gifts that they were put on this earth to share. Everybody has strengths, something that they're really good at doing, and it's different for all of us. And we've heard and we know from experience that when everybody on the team has different strengths and we can rely on each other, we're all going to thrive. So in speaking to how can we set up the conditions for success for our daughters and non-binary children so they can grow up and thrive in this male-dominated society is, and even for our sons, right, is work to your strengths. Focus on your strengths and your gifts and your purpose on this planet, and do everything you can to help you do well there. And then find the teams that will help you succeed. So find the teams that have people with different strengths and gifts so that you can play off each other and support each other. And if you're in a workplace culture where everybody is supporting everybody, something Sandra brought up is we're talking about co-creation, and Denise brought up too. We're talking co-creation. It's not a matter of, one person shows up and they've got all the answers. Creator gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. It's so we can listen twice as much as we speak. And when we listen to others and we find out their strengths and appreciate them for their gifts, and then with that becomes the culture in your workplace. And that's something that I teach when I'm talking to mainstream employers, especially about when it comes to the retention piece. How do you keep us as employees? You got to treat us with respect, just as you should treat every employee in your organization with respect. So for the allies out there, take a deep breath and listen. And when an Indigenous person who you know is Indigenous, or maybe even somebody who's not Indigenous, you don't know their background, if they stop saying something, count to 10 silently in your head before you jump in with your type A personalities and try to solve the issues. Give time for the people to take a breath and finish their thoughts. And I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Chantal. I think it's really important that we talk about this, right? Because with the teachings about humility, Indigenous people might not always be the first to put their hand up and suggest themselves as the solution or the answer or the person for the job. So the opportunity for allies is really to invite and call people in. What that looks like in action can mean all different things. But as a real example from last week for me is I saw someone in hiring, and I knew that the position they were hiring for was perfect for a particular individual, but he comes from outside of the community that was hiring. He would never put himself forward for that role. But if he was invited to that role, he would step up and step into that role with absolute confidence and conviction. But the invitation is required before that would ever be something he would be comfortable with doing. So my opportunity as an ally is to say, you need to go call David for that role. And then they can make that invitation and that ask and invite him into that space, and he can assume the role once the invitation's there. So these little tangible differences, I imagine you see a lot in your work, Chantal. Is there any other quick little like tactics any of us on the call could implement in our work if we're thinking from a recruitment and retention point of view?
Well, the first thing when I'm teaching the retention session is I start with the Truth and Reconciliation call to action number 92. So I recommend that all allies out there go read the whole thing. But if you're pressed for time, and I know we're all busy, read call to action 92, which is specifically aimed at businesses. And it explains in very clear language, in about half a page worth of prose, and prose, P-R-O-S-E is the word words, explains what Indigenous people in Canada are asking from businesses. And it's learn who we are, learn about our cultures, and there's more than one, there's dozens and dozens. Learn who we are, learn that we're all different from each other, and make sure that your teams learn and understand the context and the history, and then give opportunities. Don't advertise only for dishwashers in your restaurant for Indigenous people. Authorize for the head, advertise for the head chef and the restaurant manager, because Indigenous people can and do succeed at all levels in organizations. So please put away the stereotypes and answer call to action 92.
Great call to action. I appreciate that. I want to turn it back over to Julia's question in the chat again about how white women in particular who are still struggling for representation and recognition in traditionally male dominated fields, how they can be a better ally to their sisters. And Denise Ann, I imagine you have some experience working in this space. Could you share some of the ways that you've been platformed, amplified, and supported by other women in your field?
That's a big call to ask, because it hasn't been pleasant, I'll be honest. However, just acknowledge that part, because just to acknowledge that part and given the time that we have, and to address the sisterhood, all of us, we all lift each other up. This is a teaching. We lift each other up, we inspire. And because of those women, and I can name them all, I see them all. It doesn't include you, Sandra. But to be able to be in the moment, because the call to action is real. Segue into Chantal's presentation. Segue into Sandra's presentation of her vulnerability to listen in a moment. That's the teaching. So to my non-Indigenous, basically my sisters, we need each other. We need to uphold each other because we are mothers to the land. We have our creation story. That's where co-creation originates, from within. Whatever that process is for the women, as a collective, what background you come from, what choices you're making in your life, is the ability to be able to hold that and own that for you, so that every woman can materialize that from within. And the best part is vocalizing it. And as a result of this presentation, I've just come out with my truth, my Dibimowin, my Zuginowin, my Medumowin, my Ekodibowin, which is bravery, courage. So the final point I choose not to use the us and them, settler, non-settler, because that's the adversarial system I'm perpetuating. But when I poke and say white supremacy, white fragility, and I still hear silence, who's getting the last laugh? And my laughter is my humor from within, because that journey is hard. But the best part is the medicine, because it's the heart. That everyone, our people, listen first. They come from the heart center as a result of our life experiences. And to be able to turn that around is to feel that. And so for the other women that want to be allies, they need to own their own place in their own reality, because they too fight with their own sisters. So when I walk into a group of women, I've learned how to, hence I'm talking about women's rights, human rights, to be in that space for all women that need to own their own individuality from within, their own responsibilities from within, so that when you step up, you're going out there to facilitate. You're out there as leaders. You're out there to build. Because when you see me, I'm going to be with you, to lift you up, not to take you down, because there's lots of that going on. But the allyship, and I'll finish here, because there's a difference between allyship and alliance. Coming from Anishinaabe territory, Manitoulin, I'm part of a confederacy, and that comes into another language. So hence the listening is where the teaching points come out. That the women, all women of all background, when they step into that active voice of challenge, that's where they need to be truly within themselves so that they can step forward. And no doubt, I love my law. I love to be competitive, but that comes from within. Because every woman that has been on my path has given me a gift. And I've shared, and I love them all. And we are one human family, miigwech.
Ooh, Denise, that was powerful. Yes, one human family. I think that competition within instead of between is a big contrast. And I get asked that question a lot, is like, how do Indigenous women entrepreneurs compare to non-Indigenous women entrepreneurs? I don't think there's a lot of time spent comparing, but when we're forced to answer that question, one of the biggest differences I see is that the women I gather with, we gather in a purpose of collaboration and love and lift. It's not about who's going to outperform in sales week to week. It's like, hey, actually, let's bundle our products and services together and amplify each other's businesses, because when you win, I win. And when you are, taking care of your own and your family, that has the ripple effect in making it easier for me to do the same. So I think there's some really actionable takeaways for our listeners in that, you can tell the stories of successful Indigenous women when you're talking about successful women. And Chantal's given us a laundry list of examples of that today in her talk. And then to use your voice, right? And to step into that power from a place of love, to ask the questions that maybe the Indigenous woman in the room wants to ask, but feels vulnerable to do so. That if you have privilege in the room to ask that question, or better off answer it, I think that is a real easy stepping stone into allyship. And I like the reminder that you left us with, that something my girlfriends and I say is that, there's no more just standing in solidarity. Like, we need to rise up in revolution. And that takes action. And actually with that, I want to give Sandra an opportunity to talk about how she has been more than just someone who stands in solidarity. But Sandra, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for your work and the work of Guy. So I just would love to give you the opportunity to share that story about how we've come to work together.
Thank you, Jace, for that. Glad you mentioned Guy, because actually I was just going to say, if I may say a couple of things, actually, if I can start at what Jace, what you and Denise were just saying. There's one thing, this is not a zero-sum game, right? There's enough for everybody. And really, when we start to create and collaborate and do these things together, what happens is we find new sisters, we find new expertise, we actually access the amazing women on the panel here today. I mean, that enriches just hearing from them and, co-creating this panel with them and the audience is enriching. And it actually, I'm hoping everybody who's here and who's listening is going to take something away from this that will make them stronger and more effective in their jobs as well. So it's not that, we need to kind of give away anything. It adds. It actually brings new knowledge and new perspectives. And by the same token, I want to also acknowledge the brothers who are standing with us. This whole panel would have never happened without Guy Dancause. I don't know if I should put him on the spot and see if he wants to come on here for a moment and say something, because Guy is the brother who's actually brought us all together and who's been behind the work we've been doing, and he's helped the Institute for Science, Society and Policy tremendously in starting to build this community, or in connecting us with this wonderful community. Guy, do you want to come on for a moment? You're on mute still right now.
There we go. I thank you. I thank you for all the good words also. And firstly, I'd like to recognize that I'm sitting at home, located in Ottawa, which is on unceded Algonquin territory. And I'd like to also recognize Monica for having given us the opportunity to be partners in developing this wonderful event that we have produced today. And for Monica also being supportive in other ways towards what we're trying to do. I'd like to recognize our technical specialist that is behind all this, and that's Raf Desordi. Thank you, Raf. I know that Raf is on vacation officially. We wouldn't have been able to do this today if he wouldn't have ejected himself out of the vacation mode to be here. I'd like to thank all the panelists. I know with some of you, we've had a fairly lengthy, we've known each other for a fairly lengthy time. But what I appreciate very much is when I've called you, all of you have gracefully accepted to volunteer your time and in order to speak on the topics. I'd like to thank our moderator, who has also done a wonderful job, Jace. I thank you. And I'd be remiss without having a special thanks for Schillo, for Sandra, who has been a constant supporter to what we're trying to do, and don't have to do much convincing in order for her to step up and say, okay, let's get this thing going or the other thing going. And so to all of you, thank you. It's been wonderful. And I hope that we will be able to do it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy, very much. And Raf, absolutely, the next shout out was going to go to you. The other brother who's holding the space so that this is actually all possible is Raf, who's doing who's got us set up technologically. Thanks for thanking both Guy and Jace. That's not really where I was heading with this. What I'm trying to actually get at is that I think what seems to be working is when we make these connections and bring everybody in. I actually think we all gain so much access. And folks on the Q&A here in the chat, and including another brother, Jeff from Ottawa here. Thank you for your openness and listening and working with this. For me, the thinking here is this, and it might be selfish in a way, but the deal is, Chantal said earlier that we need to make sure that organizations treat everyone with respect. And I'm going to say right now, from my perspective, a lot of organizations are not very good at that. And yes, absolutely, that always affects groups like Indigenous people, Indigenous women, women in general, the Black and Brown communities, the gender non-conforming communities. And so it always affects those folks more. It affects us in those communities a little bit more than everybody else. But at the end of the day, organizations aren't very good at treating everybody with respect yet. And I think we have a long way to go. And I actually think the more we come together and the more we learn from each other how to create these respectful organizations, how to interact respectfully with each other, the more we'll actually be able to build organizations that are not just inclusive in terms of bringing everybody in and having us all participate, but I think it will actually allow us to build organizations that are stronger, and that we're talking about COVID and the recovery and building back better and building a better future and so on. Well, we can only do that if everybody's in. Like, it's only going to be better if we are all co-creating. We all have a way to do that. So what I'm trying to do, and I appreciate that some of this is working. And I also appreciate the opportunities I'm given through the university and through the ISSP and Monica Gattinger in particular. Having these conversations, having these panels, I think is one way that we can actually have that conversation and hopefully go into action, so that when we go back into our organizations, we actually do little tiny actions here and there. It's a little conversation there. It's hiring one other person. It all adds up. It's not this huge thing. It's not going to be done in a day. It's just little things that we can do. We can do in our interactions and our actions every day, and I think that'll make a difference.
Thank you for that, Sandra. I agree. I think it's sometimes the smaller parts that actually matter more than often what we end up seeing online and in the media, which is these big glossy, look at what we're doing, promises and social media campaigns. But, actually one important connection with one human can change their whole family and their multiple generations as a result. So it doesn't have to be at scale all the time to have deep impact. And I think that's a good reminder, because we feel like we have to bite off the whole elephant sometimes, and it prevents us from doing anything at all. So I think that's a really accessible reminder to all of us that those small actions add up. Noticing the time, we've rounded ourselves out quite beautifully to 1:30. There's one last question that we haven't got to within the Q&A that maybe we can just wrap up with on kind of a beautiful artistic note. But the question comes from Fuzia in Gatineau to say they're interested in learning more about art projects that might be more inclusive and welcoming of non-Indigenous people into the history and current realities of what it means to be Indigenous in what is today called Canada. So to anyone on our panel, if that would like to respond of any movement, art exhibits, any kind of awareness raising campaigns that you'd like to share with our audience today, both here on our call, but also on Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Chantal, Denise?
Well, thank you for the question from Gatineau. The best place is to start with the website, the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition, that provides the list of Indigenous organizations in Ottawa, but serves the region. That will give you an insight as to what is available. And this is where your voice comes up. It's easy because now we're in time of Zoom platforms. Is invitation. The invitation is opened. And I agree, because I get that question a long times, because everyone wants to be asked or invited. But that may come from our own growing up. The yes and no, maybe the good and the bad. But so that is the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition. And another specifically, that'll give you the basis for the Indigenous organizations and what they offer, and to do the search, because they all have their own programs. They also have cultural programs, and they are welcoming, and depending on what the interest is, as Gail was mentioning, some of the poetry and that type of work, you can also go to the National Arts Center that has Indigenous theater. Educate yourself with that. And another part is the Aboriginal Peoples Network is another link. So these are venues that will allow you to navigate your interest, ask questions, be comfortable in the questioning, because it's okay, because we're in a time of reconciliation and healing and moving forward. So Chantal, you may add a couple of items.
I had to Google them to remember the names because I was going to mess it up otherwise. There's an organization called Pass the Feather. So pass, like you're passing the feather, and it's timely because it brings it back to Jace talking about feathers at the beginning, .org, which is the Indigenous Arts Collective of Canada. And they also have, they sell Indigenous art on Facebook. There's a group on Facebook that sells Indigenous art. And normally behind me, I've got a calendar. My calendar for this year is a little calendar of good mind and gratitude. And it's from Dawn, who started it. And there's the turtle on the front. So you can buy, there's books written by Indigenous authors, everything from Dawn's Little Book of Smudge, Little Book of Feathers, Little Book of Whatevers, to books by, I've got a whole shelf back here, or 2 shelves back here with books by Indigenous authors. You can walk into your local bookstore with independent or even Chapters, and in Chapters they have an Indigenous authors section, so you can go and discover new authors there. And Trickster's Drift, the 3rd book in the Son of a Trickster series, came out. So that I'm waiting until this weekend to buy it, because the first 2 I bought them and I couldn't put them down. So I'm waiting till this weekend to buy the books so that I don't get distracted. So there's all kinds of great books out there. Eden Robinson, awesome author. So many great authors.
Love that, Chantal. And great strategy. Save that for the weekend, not before our panel. To each of our speakers, I invite you now to just share a closing thought. In this invitation, I ask for you to really think about the Indigenous woman who's listening. Any closing thoughts for her? Denise Ann? And Chantal, if you're ready, and Denise and
Okay.
we'll have you come off mute.
Okay, now I'm okay. Sorry. To my sisters, be in sovereignty from within. Light your fire, and I'll see you on the path. Miigwech.
To all my relations, I say there are opportunities where you see challenges currently. Please feel free to ask for help. Reach out to those organizations that are willing to help you in no matter what challenges you're currently facing. There is help. There are people who want to help, whether you're starting a business or dealing with trauma or whatever your challenges are. There's opportunities beyond those challenges, and we're here for you. So all my relations, thanks.
Thank you, Chantal. Sandra.
There's more sisters out there than you think, and brothers. And what I'm seeing is there's more and more people who are really, who care deeply and who are actually willing to put themselves on the line to make a difference, who just don't know where to start. So please be patient with us, because we will not really know how to do it right. Give us the opportunity to learn, and do feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Jace, I would like to add something.
Please.
I would like to launch a challenge the audience. And I think each woman listening to us today could challenge a young fellow, a young man, so that he will grow up to be a proponent of equal rights. So let's try to do that. Thank you.
Guy, I appreciate that call to action. And for anyone who heard that call to action and wants to respond to it, you can turn to the Moose Hide campaign for some really beautiful youth-friendly supports around how men can step into their own divine, sacred, feminine power to be to bring the balance and to help co-create the conditions for Indigenous women to thrive. And with that, I want to thank each of my panelists today for all of the shared experience and wisdom and courage and truth that you spoke here today. To all of our listeners for their questions and joining us in this important conversation, and to leave you with an invitation to step into the opportunity to join us and to co-create a future together that really does bring the balance we need to support the next 7 generations. All of our resources shared today will be available to you on the ISSP website tomorrow morning. So that's issp.uottawa.ca, available again tomorrow morning for your access. Again, thank you, miigwech, to everyone. That's it.